So tonight I'm having a conversation with a Magnitudinem type, Brandon, who has his own YouTube channel where he talks about mystical experiences and other things related to his own experience with spirituality. And I've had a conversation with him before on my channel. I put up some clips, but we didn't go a whole lot into. We didn't talk much about the types of that specific subject. But towards the end of our conversation, which I didn't record, you did ask me what your type was, and I suggested that you probably was Magnitudinem with libidinem and corpus in your configuration. And in the beginning, when I first sort of watched your content, you did very much strike me as a sapientium type. You were very much into very sort of out there stuff, spirituality, ETs, and things that weren't very conventional. It was almost fiduciamic. So I was wondering if you might actually be a fiduciam, even though you kind of looked more like what I usually associate with Magnitudinem. There are certain traits in the physical characteristics that you sometimes get clues about as well. But so yeah, I was going to ask you. The first question was going to ask you what you thought of my typology the first time you sort of came across it, but it doesn't sound like you read much about it. So I assume, is it correct that you didn't really try to type?
I had a very rough understanding of it at the time. And really I would say, I don't have a strong understanding of all the different types to be able to, add much to that. I'd say it's probably best that, for the content, if we're going to discuss that, it just comes from a point of, you're the one who understands the system, and you can give your input and explanations of it. I guess it would be, I'm just here as an example of someone that you can fit into the types and describe, and I can provide background of my own life and how that relates to these different things.
Yeah, okay. You perhaps want to move the camera so you're in the center. You should be in the center like that. I don't know how it cuts afterwards, but since you are an example of a type, it's good if you are kind of visible. But I guess I should simply start by, since I recognized you as a Magnitudinem, and I'm going to go into why or how what I based that on. But basically, my descriptions, sort of like the key words that I tend to use when I write like profiles and make videos about Magnitudinem, I tend to use keywords like they have a kind of grandiose or ideal-based judgment. They tend to question things, and they have a strong inner judge, what is called the superego in the Freudian system. And there can be a lot of pessimism and disdainfulness, and like an adaptation to ideals and self-ideals, where the disdainfulness sort of comes towards that which falls outside of like the ideal or what their preferences are and so forth. And there can also be like a worship of grandeur. So I'm kind of wondering if there's anything in this that you can recognize.
No, I'd say, a lot of that you just described seems accurate for me. I guess, with personality types, they span not just across like one part of your life though. So, I'm kind of speaking from where I'm at now. The only thing that didn't really resonate with what you said right there was just the pessimism. But that's something that I definitely experienced at plenty of times in my life. But for quite a while, I've been more of an optimist, a pretty heavy optimist. I actually have a friend who is pretty intelligent guy with a PhD and everything, and he basically says, you know, that I'm too optimistic at times. I'm like overly optimistic, so I don't look at the ways that things could go wrong enough, because I'm always focused on how things are going to go right, which does have some advantages, but of course drawbacks too to it.
Yeah, that's I kind of sense that kind of very enthusiastic energy, like positive, like you said, when I watched some of your videos and also some of your anecdotes about yourself, and that made me think that you were probably libidinum secondary, because that tends to add more positive emotions. So I'm going to it was also, you talked about like social anxiety, which made me lean more towards magnitudinem than fiducium. But I'm going to I ask this question that I tend to ask of people that I'm going to interview, or I tend to ask it to almost anyone where I'm kind of interested in knowing about their energy, even if I know what their energy is. And that is those questions like what do you consider to be your recurring tendencies, and what is your personal struggle? And your answer was that you remember having the strong intuition that you was very important and destined for great things from roughly 5 years old or so. And that is something that I associate with libidinem a lot, this sense of importance. And you also see that with the combination of magnitudinem and libidinem, like some magnitudinem with libidinem can have kind of like a hero complex, especially when I have excidium in the configuration. I don't think you have excidium because you, as we're going to go into, you have had some issues with social anxiety. And anxiety in general is related to the limbic system, or the gratum sphere in my model. And libidinem is in the gratum sphere, and also corpus, which I think is your component in the morem sphere, is also like the reflection of that sphere. So it has the most influence from that sort of anxiety, emotion-driven limbic system in that sphere, and that I think explains pretty well this combination of both this kind of positivity and like you feel a bit special, and also in combination with this anxiety. And there's something I actually haven't brought up a lot with libidinum, that they can feel like special. I talked with a libidinum type previously, Bolelo, and he didn't exactly bring that up or mention that. He said some things about him feeling lucky, and like he wanted to know what his mission in life was. Like he felt like he might be unique in some ways. I don't remember exactly what he said, so it leaned a little bit into that, but we didn't really say anything about that. But when I read your description here, it reminded me a little bit about myself, because that's the one component we have in common. I also have libidinum in the gratum sphere in my configuration. And when I was young, I also used to feel a bit like I enjoyed feeling like I was special, like among my friends. I didn't exactly think that I was the leader, but I felt like I was like the main character or something like that. Like the word friend fit my friends. Like from my like in the context of me, they were like friends. That name or term suited them. But I felt like I was more than a friend to them, even though I perhaps didn't do anything special. It was like I guess I perhaps wanted them to perceive me as something more than that simple term, like friend or something like that. And I also thought that was a little bit silly. Like I knew that it was kind of silly, but I still, and as I have like matured and doing this sort of spiritual practices where you sort of detach from your tendencies, I can sort of see how that aspect can be useful, because if you do feel special, and it kind of motivates you to go out into the world and do things like appearing on video or make a YouTube channel and things like that. and so you can sort of see the usefulness in what other people might perceive as ego, or what might turn into an ego if you're not aware of it, or if you get tangled up in it. You can
I've found in my recent spiritual pursuits, I was getting pulled into these really like overconfident overestimations of where I was at, and this actually was like fueling like really quick progress, spiritually speaking. But eventually, like, I had to deconstruct that and realize that it was overconfidence that was happening, and that the results that I was getting were not as grand as what I was thinking. But regardless, the overconfidence itself was generating a lot of forward progress that I think without having that, it wouldn't have occurred quite as quickly, or as, it wouldn't have worked as well. So there can be benefits to this type of, sense of yourself being this grand thing, even if, in many aspects you realize that's not the case. When it does come up, it seems to, if you're aware enough of yourself and the situation, it can provide some benefits. But there's a lot to watch out for with it too.
Yeah, and then you continued. You said that. I mean, that's pretty early for someone to be like 5 years old and feel like you were destined for great things. And then you said around the exact same time, you had an insight into the nature of solipsism, which you say one could call a mystical experience. Like, what is your like definition of a mystical experience? Like, how is it related to solipsism?
Okay, well, this experience, it's kind of hard to describe to a lot of people who have not had similar things happen to them. But and I will say, first off, like, I don't believe, fully in probably what like the viewers or you would think of as solipsism. It's something a lot deeper than that kind of combines solipsism with the opposite or other viewpoints. But anyway, at this young age, I essentially had the realization that, there's no way that like other people are having this rich of a conscious experience. That was the thought, and that thought triggered an incredibly high state of consciousness. Basically, something that most people would probably need at least a low to moderate dosage of a psychedelic to reach themselves, or, a lot of meditation practice to have that type of a mystical experience. And I only say that because I've done those things myself and seen that those things produce similar types of shifts. But with mystical experiences, it's hard to describe to people exactly what's happening, because there are formless aspects of consciousness that are coming into things that the first time, or probably first like 50 plus times that someone has that said type of experience, they won't even understand what a formless aspect of consciousness is. You have to do a lot of study to know is precisely what I'm talking about, and it's difficult to really describe these things in words. But yeah, it's specifically with any type of solipsis type mystical experiences, it is a feeling that your perceptual bubble is all that there is, and there's a certain grandness that comes into that perspective. So that's kind of a rough way to say it. I know it's not the main focus of this, so I don't want to get too into that, but
yeah. And then you go on saying that you always wanted to connect with others. and loved it when it happened. So you say you are naturally high in extroversion, but you had severe social anxiety until you were 18, which repressed the extroversion to make it operate as introversion. And then you made the determined resolution to speak your mind 100% one night before school at age 18. And when you did this the next morning, you received a lot of validation, which immediately triggered your first manic episode. Yeah, you say that you are bipolar type 1.
Yeah, I've been clinically diagnosed as that. It's not a question at this point. I've
Yeah,
had
okay.
enough
How
clinical
do you?
verification of that.
Yeah, okay. So how can you do you separate, because you said that you had your first manic episode and more mystical experience. Do you separate these, or do you think they are connected in some way? Like if someone is skeptical and think that perhaps it was all just a manic, like
Well, that could be a very long episode. But the short answer is that there is a separation there, because people can have manic episodes without mystical experiences. Mystical experiences are one of the common symptoms of a manic episode. Even more so, a person with bipolar disorder can have mystical experiences and not be in a manic episode. It's and there are some maps of Buddhist awakening that are very precise that I've gotten into in the past several months, which go even deeper into that. But I think we'll start losing the viewers and where they even know where we're at if we go into that right now. So we can kind of save that for another
but perhaps
time.
you could. I think that perhaps this bipolar type 1 might be somewhat related to your energies. So perhaps you could describe like that diagnosis, like what is like the manic part, and I guess by bipolar that means that you also have like a depressive state sometimes.
Yeah. So the manic part is basically, I guess I will go ahead and just pull in some of the framework of the Theravadan Buddhist maps of awakening that you can find very precisely described in Daniel M. Ingram's book. He's a medical doctor who's also gone very far in Buddhism, but his book is called Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha. Anyway, there are different stages of insight that occur on the spiritual path. He claims, and many Buddhists claim, for everyone, no matter what tradition they go on. The first are very normal like states of consciousness, but then they reach the fourth stage of insight, which is called the arising and passing away, which is basically what we would see the bipolar person's manic episode occur in as well. This is also something very similar to if a normal person just goes out and takes a high dose of a psychedelic, they're many times almost guaranteed to hit some type of arising and passing away experience, which is going to be a very positive and intense spiritual high. Now, I would also say that my personal flavor of bipolar disorder might be more skewed toward the spiritual elements of the disorder than for other people. So it gets really hairy getting into the details. But basically, mania is some sort of high for everyone. It is incredibly euphoric. Unless we're talking about some type of mixed state, which is both mania and depression. Again, more complication that, or in detail that I don't know if it serves us to get into right now. But after that stage, in the stages of insight in the Buddhist map I'm describing, comes immediately after it several stages of insight, which Daniel Ingram calls the dark night of the soul. It's basically just depression is the easiest way you could put it. One of the stages is called misery. Another is called reobservation, which is the stage before you reach equanimity, which is when you make it out of the dark night of the soul or the depression. I don't know if all depression and all mania fall on this map, or only if someone doing a lot of spiritual practice ends up falling on this map. But yeah, what I would say is they can be very closely related, especially if you do have, I don't know what we're going to claim here makes a person be closer to the spiritual side of things in life. But if you are and you have bipolar disorder, understanding of this map can really change a lot of things with the way that you perceive yourself and can move forward. I don't know how well that answered the question directly.
Well,
but
I'm kind of wondering what like the medical, I assume you have had some kind of psychiatrist or some therapist diagnose you as particularly bipolar type 1.
Yes, I have. I've had probably about 15 hospitalizations in the past 8 years. And, probably, I think 14 of those, roughly 15 were manic episodes. The main criteria for diagnosing bipolar disorder is essentially, has the person had a manic episode or not yet? So that's how medically it is approached. I've done a lot of research into bipolar disorder, the medical ways of viewing it. You can view my channel. The majority of my videos between like the early to middle content were almost all focused around bipolar disorder in some way. So.
Okay. And then the last thing you said there was validation has always been yearned for heavily to confirm the intuition of incredible personal importance. And like this seeking for validation is sort of what I assumed when I talked about trait from Magnitudinem, like adaptation to ideals or self-ideals. I guess that's like, because you said you like identified with what I said, that this validation could be related to like this inner judge that like demands things from you. Would you put it that way? Like, is that how it feels? This seeking validation, like to be able to confirm the intuition of incredible.
Yes, it's the validation is only, I feel like the only real reason the validation is more important for me than it may be for a normal person is simply because I have this intuitive sense of importance. And if I'm living my life and any time that's not being accepted, or at least in the past before doing a level of spiritual work on myself that most people would just not understand. I had to really work at this to lower the need for validation and be okay with social interactions when I'm not being accepted and loved and praised, and at honestly a ridiculous level. It's basically like someone's, shooting an arrow at me if I'm not getting some type of praise. If someone else has a better idea or something, it's like this micro judgment occurs within myself. It may even be at a subconscious level. Like, you are not what you feel to yourself to be, or these people are not treating you as good as you think you are. So then there's that conflict that happens internally with any of these things that I just described. And that conflict itself is kind of where my biggest struggles have always come from, is, you know, trying to essentially manifest a life where I can be comfortable understanding my own importance and not being threatened by other people also being important and other people also having their own gifts and being popular or whatever. I think, do you kind of get the picture?
Yeah, and I'm wondering if that conflict could be related. Do you think that is related to your bipolar? Like,
I think it could be. I mean, it's very possible that, you know, just the genetic trait of the bipolar being within me even before, you know, I first had that, you know, intuitive feeling or recognize it in a way that I can remember now. Maybe that was always operating to some degree because of that. And there, another thing which we could get into that would take some time to explain is the connection between bipolar disorder and spirituality. There is a strong connection there, and I would say for myself personally, maybe where a lot of that intuition came from was some type of spiritual sense, or even you could say the genes themselves were creating this sense that I was meant to be doing something very impactful. So it's hard to tell exactly what the cause was, but I think the bipolar disorder, in my specific case, was certainly like related to that inner sense of importance.
yeah, because I think of the like the sapientium types and magnitudinem as like spiritual. They are often spiritual seekers or people who tend to value the spiritual and this stuff that like ordinary people are not so concerned with.
I think that's a big reason why I had such a struggle, is because, for one, the culture that I was being brought up in, it didn't really have a very strong framework for any of this spiritual kind of stuff. So when I started having these feelings of importance and also, you know, mystical experiences at an age which, you know, there aren't many people who have these mystical experiences naturally at this type of a young age. I think it made me feel some type of importance in myself that society wasn't ready to like place me into. It's kind of like, you know, maybe a kid being born into a culture which does nothing with mathematics, and he's born and maybe his talent is to be a mathematician. I feel like my talent was to do spiritual work, but I don't know. I imagine you've probably come across like the spiral dynamics model and things like that with our culture, or, you know, mainly being, you know, in the West being some mixture of stage blue, orange, and green, but primarily stage orange. Stage orange really kind of cut down on the importance of any type of spiritual type stuff. So I think being put in that type of a culture gave me a lot of challenges, because I wasn't put in a place where I could start developing that and kind of working through that sense of importance and finding out what it actually was about, and that it was just really about me working on one specific axis of life and focusing on that to give myself back to the world, to develop that ability and provide there. But a lot of the issue with not receiving the validation that I seek or sought was because maybe the gifts that I had, whatever they may be, were not, the culture itself just wasn't structured in a way to even value them. So it wasn't until very recently that I started getting into circles with some very talented and intelligent people along the spiritual path to start to feel that validation in a more healthy way, but also receive criticism from these people who I knew were seeing the value within me, but also trying to get me to see more things that would bring me down to a more accurate level of personal evaluation of where I'm at, my abilities, my talents, who I am, what I can give back. That, you know.
Yeah, I think that is a common experience for all the sapientian times. Perhaps not particularly spirituality, but like it's like something about the culture they grew up in which doesn't really satisfy them, because they often suited to things that are, if not spiritual, it has more to do with mind, such as mathematics, like you explained, or like they're interested in science or in art, and things like that. And so they tend to become seekers, and like they have to find like their own communities, a bit like that. So they become seekers. And yeah,
it's very hard to have any type of, you know, popularity or acceptance in normal groups as, you know, whatever mixture of types I might be. And I'm sure there are many others who have a similar configuration. They will run into the same problem of, you know, really just not fitting into the more common ways that people go about living life, where, you know, definitely more, you know, mind-based than many people are. And, you know, that comes at a cost, because to be able to relate to a lot of people, if they aren't as, you know, you could say intellectually or mind-based, there's going to be discord there.
Yeah. And one reason I wanted to interview you was because I felt that you perhaps might not resemble the stereotype. I have often emphasized that Magnitudinem is kind of very questioning and skeptical of things. It can be kind of rationalistic and devoted to science, in a way where they are like trying to debunk things.
I had that within me basically when I would say I started to move from stage blue right around age 12 and became an atheist up until my first mystical experience, which showed me that that was a limited way of viewing the world, at least for my direct experience. And I was forced to consider possibilities that I never would have in the past. So there was a lot of that within me. And I do still have a lot of skeptical tendencies, but I would say now it's moved. If I had to place myself in spiral dynamics, which, you know, of course, these are just models, and it's never as simple as like putting one person into one type or one stage. And even spiral dynamics as a map is supposed to be a cultural stage of evolution, but now a lot of people online are applying it personally. So it gets quite mixed up, but I would say it's more like a stage yellow thing. So moving beyond, you know, the very logical type of framework in stage orange to then stage green being way more wide open to things and accepting things, but not even really understanding a lot of where they come from or being critical of parts of it, to like yellow becoming to integrate both of that. That's one way of kind of describing maybe where I transitioned from that skeptical type mindset into a less skeptical way of viewing things.
Yeah, so it does fit you. And I did watch one video where you did mention that. I even wrote it down that you became an atheist when you were 12. And you refer to that as your second significant experience. And but one thing I when I read this like description which you sent me, I felt that there was something a bit missing. Like one thing that I often sticks out with Magnitudinem, and especially because right now I am thinking a lot in how these energies express themselves secondary, because I'm planning to do videos about the configurations where I'll talk more about the like how they express themselves secondary. And one thing I have noticed is that Magnitudinem secondary tends to increase a kind of disdainfulness. Like they are very easily like annoyed with things, which has to do with this judgment, but it's not always simply aimed at themselves, but it can be aimed at the outside.
I experience a lot of that. It's starting to get reduced now, but like when I would go to bars, for example, like after the spiritual experiences and maybe moving up the spiral, you could say, it was just being viewed at that point from a perspective of like all of these normal people don't know what is going on. It's very hard to connect with them because the things that I want to talk about and express, like philosophical concepts, whatever, they have no care for this. And I did have a lot of judgment within myself, even though I would maybe try to trick myself and think that I'm like accepting of everyone. At that point, I was still very much judging the average everyday person, simply because they weren't connecting with the things that I valued, which were these more philosophical or spiritual type ideals, such as truth or love or, you know, God or whatever you want to put names to it. But so the judgment definitely can go, you know, at yourself and at the world and all other people, and the type that I seem to be.
Yeah, I did write down. You did mention a kind of funny thing. I guess you, even though you grew up in a kind of non-spiritual environment, did you grow up in like a Mormon church or something?
Yeah, I grew up in my mother was and still is Mormon. And I actually judged her a lot for that for a while. It was funny. I was having a conversation with her the other night about these very like complex Buddhist ideas, and then we start talking about like Luciferianism and stuff. And I didn't realize that she actually had enough wisdom and stuff way beyond anything I ever would have applied to what I thought would be possible for someone in the Mormon faith. It was really interesting to see that, you know, she was really more advanced than the typical, you know, you might say stage blue fundamentalist type religious people who would end up in such an organization. But my father was always very secular. He was raised Catholic and kind of moved away from it. And his kind of philosophy, morally and spiritually, you might say, is just, I've even asked him about this, and have you ever seen the movie E.T.?
Yeah, it was a long time ago, but
Yeah, but there's a point in that movie where like E.T. just like tells a human like be good, and my dad said that to me, like that's like the basis of his whole like moral philosophy, is that it alone, and that there nothing else needs to be there. Whereas like my mother had was in a faith that like had many rules and stuff. So it was interesting to see, like that's kind of the foundation of where I came from, was that there was a difference there.
Yeah, but there was one thing that I thought sounded very sort of magnitudinamic, and that was when you mentioned that when you were 8, you had a gigantic visualization of just being like this 60-foot tall demon in the Mormon church that you were sitting in. So while people were like praying and singing hymns, and you were in absolute hatred. You used the phrase absolute hatred, and that sort of reminded me of like this disdainfulness, which I guess is associated with the judge that we have talked about. And you said like the hatred of the most evil of evil itself. Does that mean that like what you hated was something you perceived as evil, or did you feel evil, like the hatred within you was evil?
With that specific experience, the way that I look at it now, it was basically I think it was tied to me starting to hate the how can I say it? Basically the limited understanding within the church, the more fundamentalist type way of viewing the world that accepts things as absolutes. I think I had some type of an intuitive disdain for that way of viewing the world, and I thought that there was some type of limitation there, and for some reason that opened the door to this incredibly vivid visualization of me tearing them limb for limb.
Yeah.
As an 8-year-old, I just had all of that hatred within me. It was
and
quite,
this is
quite
why
strange.
this is also why I picked the name Magnitudinem, because it's this extreme magnitude, like a 60-foot demon. Is almost something.
My life is about magnitude. Yeah, it's just always about like extreme things, extreme experiences. I think that's why I resonated so heavily with like the teachings of Leo Gura, because he's always talking about the which I've strayed from a lot of his stuff now, although I still find a lot of value in it. But he was always talking about like himself, like you can realize that you are God and stuff like that. And, absolute truth, like you can discover it in your own direct experience. All these things spoke really heavily to me and like matched that type of intuition as like, okay, this is a way that I can actualize what I felt within myself, which was that great inner importance. Even if other people don't ever really see it or know it, I can feel that for myself. One of my habits before I ever like had manic episodes or anything was when I got my first cars, or even when I was driving my parents' cars, I would just max them out, like their maximum speed, like every day. Once I got my own car, pretty much every day after school, I had a BMW 325 Ci, and it was limited to the speed of 128 miles an hour electronically. So I would just go on country roads and just hit the maximum speed like 15 times a day, and then go home and play World of Warcraft or something where I wanted to be the absolute best. And that's still how I approach my spirituality, is that I want to be the absolute pinnacle of pinnacles, kind of at the core of who I am. If I'm authentic to myself and expressing it honestly, is there's that seeking of wanting to be the best.
Yeah, I wonder if Magnitudinem is this category of people that sometimes tend to get seduced by certain cults or cult leaders, people who promise big things, even though it should be obvious that it is like bullshit. But perhaps there is this kind of a desire for greatness, or
yeah, it definitely can be a pitfall. When someone sells you the idea of being something way bigger than what you previously thought is possible. There's definitely a seduction type experience that happens from the magnitudinem perspective, that you want that so much, and finally someone is basically has the balls enough and everything to tell you that yes, this is possible and here's how you do it, and you immediately get sucked into following that and trying to actualize that as much as possible. And it's like that cult or that idea or whatever is found to be the only source of where you can get that. So then you kind of fall head over heels into it. And that's kind of what I did with actualize.org and Leo's content. And now still with other forms of spirituality, it's like whatever's saying you can progress to higher things. It's very easy. Like I'll go into it full force. But at the end of the day, like all of that, it for me specifically, I've had so many data points of doing this that I'm realizing that, yeah, none of them are really a full answer. And you're never going to like have someone lead a cult or something where they're going to be the right one to follow. The answers are, everywhere right in front of your face. The more spiritual you get, I would say specifically. And that's kind of tied into the more Eastern ways of viewing enlightenment, that the kind of it's here right now, maybe more Zen-like or Taoist way of viewing things.
Yeah, it's more of a balance between like the mundane and practical and this kind of spiritual non-attachment and like this interest in spirituality, which can be a bit escapistic for the mental types, the sapientium types. But I wanted to ask you if like, because sometimes I encounter these people who are like trying to stand up for actualize.org and other people who I sometimes identify as Magnitudinem. Do you think there is some way? Do you have some suggestion on how to reach them? Like if a Magnitudinem is in this state where they want to reach something big and someone wants to bring them down back to reality.
From my experience and having a lot of experience with this kind of stuff, I would say to that person, and specifically with what Leo's saying, maybe there is nothing absolutely wrong with what he is saying and what he claims is possible, but you're still going to be living in a mundane meat suit unless you get to some level way beyond where Leo's at, So realistically, you're going to have to operate within this world. And that's why I see a lot of the people who have been on the spiritual path a lot longer than Leo will say that they're like criticizing him from below because they, don't believe in these high possibilities. But when I said to my meditation teacher, who was also my therapist and great friend, the word God consciousness, which I got that from the lexicon of, Leo Gura, you could see he almost like rolls his eyes like within his head. And the more that I go into this experience, like I see that, and I just get more data, like Leo has not embodied these things nearly to the level that other spiritual masters have. And there's nothing wrong with that or Leo's teachings necessarily, in my opinion, but you just have to remember that it's two sides of a coin. There is, yes, this point of yourself where there is this huge capacity to connect with, even if we don't want to call it divine, we can call it brain functioning or whatever you want to put in your paradigm. these experiences are possible and they are incredibly meaningful and in a lot of ways curative and healthy, but they are problematic if you let them go, if you let them sink in and kind of brainwash you that is your relative existence too. It's just, you have to find a way to combine them. And to combine is the essence of yoga. To yoga, the word comes, at least I've heard in multiple places, from the old term to yoke, which was to put two oxen together with like some wooden thing. Yoga is just bringing two seemingly different realities into one combined reality and living that balance of both. And that is the living of the divine and the mundane at all times. And I would say that is a much higher ideal than being at just one or the other. So that's where you want to be. And I would say that getting too lost in the seeking of the high will keep you from ever finding that balance where the high and the low are always present and the beauty is always there. And I'm telling you from my experience, that's like if I'm speaking to someone from one of those organizations directly who's caught and at the same type of personality I am, who's caught idolizing that peak experience so much, I'm telling those people directly, if any of them are watching, that what you really want is that balance of both, where you can live life as a normal person and be in connection with the mundane and that, and what is, above the mundane, if you want to call it above. That's the desire that I have found is more worthwhile, is to merge it all into one thing where you can have it consistently. And seeking the peak experiences is not always a reliable way of reaching that endpoint.
Yeah, so I only had a few more questions. I was a bit afraid that I might have too little to cover 1 hour, but I see we're already almost an hour, so I will just mention this. This also has a lot to do with Magnitudinem. I don't think you said that you did the minimum work in school to get the best results, and you also say that that's what your life has always been. Like you always been lazy with flying colors. That kind of sounds a bit
Yeah.
like fiducian. Fiducian tends to like rely a lot on their own talents. And I think the reason why I often associate many of the traits that I see in you with fiducian is because I think the combination of, because Magnitudinem is right next to fiducian, so they are related. It's like the type that is not fiducian but is the closest to fiducian. And in combination with libidinem then adds this kind of laziness, I guess, because if you already feel special and have positive emotions, I guess you are not as disciplined.
Yeah, you don't. Yeah, if you feel too special, you don't feel the need to do the work is the drawback. And that loss of the need to do the work is what keeps you from actually becoming as special as you thought that you always were in a real way that actually contributes value to the world. It takes work. And if you think you're too special already, you'll never get to the specialness that you're actually capable of in a realistic, true way that will help other people.
Yeah, so I only had one more question, or something that I noticed in one of your videos. You had this kind of nails which you had kind of painted, and it was a bit feminine, but it was also very sort of fancy, and that also made me think of like libidinem can be very attracted to things that are like fancy and what is the word, like flamboyant, bit like that. Do you want to tell the story of your nails?
Sure, I love the nails. So the story of my nails also comes, this is part of my I don't know if it's necessarily a personality thing, but I've always been, I guess you could say, sort of trans, in that I always not only like saw a lot of divine beauty and like the image of being a beautiful woman, but also that I wanted to be that too. It's just I realized that within, you know, this physical life, I can't actually be that beauty, that feminine beauty that I've always wanted to be. And the nails I got put on while I was in a manic episode. And a lot of what mania is you drop all of the judgments and social worries. And at least for me, you start to embody more of who you feel like you truly are. And it was adding that femininity. And if you notice, the nails were also black and red, and that relates to some of my Luciferian spiritual awakenings. It was meant to be like that. And then it was so funny, the woman who was you know, making the nails, like I told her I wanted it to be like a black to red ombre. She did that, and then it's almost like she sensed like the inner nature of my personality. And on my ring finger, she said, "You need diamond. You need diamond." And she put the diamonds on that, and it was so perfect and just made me so happy. And was like a perfect expression of like my femininity and masculinity and the spiritual experiences of where I was at the time. And then of course, you know, being in a manic episode and, you know, expressive, I tipped her like $300 or something and made her day. And that's something I do a lot of when I'm manic or in high spiritual states. I'll just like give people a bunch of money. And it like helps them, and then it also like helps me feel like I'm being a positive person and giving person. And it also kind of ties into the idea of losing the attachment to your material possessions and stuff, not caring as much about me having the money as, you know, someone else having the money, especially if they're doing something positive and I sense something positive about them. So that's kind of the story of the nails.
Yeah. You said that it perhaps did not have something to do with personality, but I have been sort of speculating that even like the phenomena of trance might be related to something like these energies, because libidinum in particular is associated with like people would probably describe it as the most feminine energy, especially when women have it as their primary function.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised if it is related.
Yeah, I guess I said that mainly because I didn't want to suggest that being trans is just a personality type phenomena. I think it is more complex than that, than just personality alone. But
yeah,
there are a lot of reasons why I have that view, but I know we're nearing close to the end of the hour, so.
Yeah, well, because I have sometimes also felt like I have a feminine. I can identify this with this idea that you have brought up and that others have brought up, like Carl Jung, this idea of the masculine and the feminine within you.
Yeah, it's within every
and that's
person.
Why I kind of wonder, because sometimes I don't feel like what I feel like is the feminine in me is the same as what I see in certain trans people. So there is this debate today very often with like women in trans men or trans women in sport. I guess a trans woman is like a man identifying as a woman. But I always felt like sports was something like masculine.
Yeah.
But apparently there are like people who can feel like they are women and yet they are into sports. And so there are many questions that come up in my head, like how do all these people actually identify like what is feminine and what is masculine. And so sometimes I've thought that like I've developed my own definitions, but sometimes I feel that other people have other perspectives, and that's why I'm more and more curious, like how people like identify these specific, what makes up the feminine and what makes up the masculine. But that is kind of off topic. So is there anything else you wanted to comment?
No, I felt like this was a good conversation. I think if people watch it through and are familiar with their system, your system, they should get some good, things to ponder off of it. So yeah, feel free. I mean, if you want to continue more discussion about, my relation to the personality types or other things within your system or whatever, I'm open to it. And if you can you just send me a message at the end of this of where you think I am on the types, and just briefly like maybe a one sentence description, just because I'd like to do more research into your system. I think it would help me with better understanding of myself to look back into that again now.
Yeah, we can keep talking after I have stopped the recording.
Okay, great.
So I will just stop there, and I hope that people will find this useful. It was useful to me. I thought it was very interesting, and I thought that it fit with my. I feel like it supports this typology. So I was very happy with this conversation. So thank you for participating.
No problem. My pleasure.